All right, so starting with the why. Why climate risk? Why should we care about this? Well, number one, compliance. So depending on the size of your business, your company may be soon required to start reporting on climate risks. And this is coming hand in hand with requirements to also report greenhouse gas footprints. So California has passed last year a greenhouse gas reporting and climate risk requirement bill. We also have the SEC legislation that's actually on pause and in litigation right now, but we hope to see that move forward. And also other states are considering similar legislation. So if your business is doing business in these states, you're going to be required to increase your reporting there. Also, the federal government has a sustainability plan, if you didn't know. And so they are driving sustainability related disclosures through their contracts and suppliers also. So all in all, these regulations have the potential to impact over 10,000 companies. And so even if your company isn't directly impacted by some of this new legislation, if you're part of the supply chain of these businesses, those questions around your greenhouse gas footprint and your climate risks are going to start trickling down. And in the past decade, I would say there has been a significant and clear shift moving from voluntary disclosures in this space towards mandatory, not just in the US, but in Europe especially, and most recently in Australia. They just passed some legislation related to this. So could be a compliance issue for your company soon. Secondly, climate change is costing us. So the US National Climate Assessment has reported that extreme weather events currently cost the country and taxpayers $1 billion every 3 weeks. Last year in 2023, the US experienced a record $28 billion plus climate events. So that was totaling $93 billion, which was almost double the $50 billion that was allocated in the 2021 infrastructure bill. So clearly there's very real costs associated with weather events, especially. And in the past few years, you can see the graph on the right shows a very clear trend that the number of extreme weather events are increasing and costing us more. So, climate is really just one type of risk. And so I think, maybe some small businesses don't have the same resources to think about risk or manage risk in the same way. So my goal with this webinar is to get you introduced to the high-level concepts and some free, easy-to-use tools that I've scrubbed the internet for, so you can bring that back to your business and incorporate it into your processes. So while there is a lot of costs associated with climate resilience, it's cheaper to manage those now than react to them later. So in the 2024 Climate Resiliency Report, it's estimated that for every $1 invested in natural disaster resilience and preparedness, communities can save $13 in damages, cleanup costs, and long-term economic impacts. So the time to act is now. So the process for assessing climate risks first starts with assessing and prioritizing those risks. Then you're going to want to mitigate as much as possible, and finally adapt. So when you're assessing and prioritizing climate risks, there's a plethora of topics under that umbrella. It could be extreme weather, it could be reputation. And you're going to want to think about your business model and which of those topics are most applicable to your business model. So for example, if all of your employees work remote and you have one office building that you rent, in the middle of Alexandria or what have you, maybe sea level rise isn't going to be material to your business. And so that's what you want to first prioritize, which topics are applicable to you, and then once you assess those risks, which ones are the most impactful and immediate that you want to start addressing the soonest. So then comes mitigation, and this is really lessening your business's impact on the environment. So, businesses inherently either consume natural resources or consume energy, emit greenhouse gas emissions or other pollution. And so really doing what we can to mitigate those impacts is the first step. And then we can start to adapt. And so this is lessening the impact of extreme climate events or the effects of the transition on your business. So if you're at a certain level of corporate, this is what we would call a double materiality assessment. So it's not just the impact of the climate on your business, but the impact of your business on the climate. So if you ever hear double materiality, that's what that's referring to. Okay, assessing climate risks. So when we start assessing climate risks, there's really two categories of risk we want to start thinking about. The first is physical risks. So this is direct or indirect damage to your physical assets. This is probably the one that folks think about the most. This is your storms, your flooding, your extreme heat, or even extreme cold days. Then we have transitional risks. So this may be the harder to quantify side of risks, but it's basically anything that's associated with a transition to a low carbon or even circular economy. So for example, doing operations with, investing in low emissions technology may actually cost your business in the short term while saving in the long term. There's reputations there. And so we're going to get into each of these in a little bit more detail next. All right, physical risks. When you start thinking about physical risks, you're going to think of location. Where in the world? Where are my facilities located? Where do we do business? What kind of workforce conditions are present? And then not just about your business, but you may want to start thinking about your supply chain as well. So do I have critical materials or critical suppliers? Where are they located? How are we transporting these materials or my product to the market? These are all things that you might want to start thinking about, and how extreme weather events could impact the physical movement and location of assets. So just like any other risk, you're going to start thinking about likelihood and severity of extreme weather or climate events. These could be acute, like a tornado, or they could be chronic, for example, drought or, even flooding. So we've got rainfall, drought, as I said, winds, fires, snow, sea level rise, air pollution, water quality, shifting ecosystems, cold, heat, or even disease. And so, here on the right is a 5x5 risk matrix. You can do a 3x3, but basically how likely is it to occur? And if it does occur, how severe would that be? So an example question would be, in the next decade, is this facility likely to experience sea level rise? The answer could be very likely and moderate sea level rise, which could look like an additional 10 days of sunny day flooding by 2050. When I worked at a facility, very energy intense facility here in Frederick, everybody thinks about the extreme heat, but cold swings are part of climate change as well. And we actually had a day that was so cold, the air intake on our HVAC, our systems couldn't keep up with the cold air, and it actually shut the plant down for an hour as we got redundancy systems back online. So these are definitely things that you want to think about your operations. So I mentioned we had a record number, I think it was $28 billion plus climate events last year. I live in Maryland, as I said, so in early August last year, we had severe weather roll through. So we had a number of tornadoes and high winds that came through. You can see that actually storms, severe storms, are a very big contributor to these, costs that we're spending on resilience and recovery. Of course, we also have flooding, cold weather. If you live in a lot of parts of the country are getting affected by severe climate events these days. And so, it's not just these huge events, but one-off events as well that you want to start thinking about, like how often do we get thunderstorms? Is that going to start increasing? What about hail? And even insurance is a risk. So that's more of a transitional risk related to extreme weather, but you may have a harder time getting insurance for facilities located in high-risk areas as well. All right, so transitional risks. This is probably one that folks think about less, but it's still very real. And this is really the one where the risks turn into opportunities for your business to stand out and do better. So there's reputation. As I talked about, there's keeping up with compliance. The trends in compliance is moving in a very clear direction. It's not just greenhouse gas disclosures and climate risks, but several states are also considering packaging or end-of-life product management legislation. Then we have new technologies emerging, energy sources are shifting, and also affordability. So, there's a lot of new technologies out there to help your operations decarbonize. It's generally great, but you're going to have to do return on investment analysis for those. If we're stuck with expensive natural gas, for example, where we could go solar, you're going to have to balance those technology and shifts with cost, upfront cost versus long-term operational expenses. So there's branding and innovation. Maybe your customers want more eco-friendly products and they're willing to pay more. Well, that's a chance for your company to innovate and also brand itself as a responsible business. And then also redundancy in supply chain. So, depending on the nature of your supply chain, especially if you're focusing on raw materials or, you're reliant on the cloud, you're going to want to think about what if, even if it's a transitional risk, a lot of things still live in the real world. And so you're going to want to think about redundancy, plan Bs for your supply chain. So an example question here might be, does the next generation of our target consumer care more or less about the environmental sustainability of our product? That's an example of a transitional risk question. Okay, tool highlights. In total today, I'm going to be talking about 6 tools, and you're going to see those in the recap for this. So don't worry about having to screen capture anything. I'm going to send all these out to you. But I spent this month really, and some of these I was actually using already, but combing through, there's a lot of tools out there, which is good, but all of these tools are free. They're easy to use. You don't have to sign up for anything, at least at the time of this webinar. And so I want to share those tools with you. The first is climatecheck.com. So this is for homes and real estate, but it's really good for individual building locations. So if you're thinking about a facility at a particular address, you just type your address in and it gives you this risk range. And so these are typically the 5 categories of extreme weather events that you're going to be thinking about for physical risks: heat, heat and cold, storms, droughts, fires, and floods. And so you can see here that for my location in Maryland, the highest risk is around heat as well as storms. And so the overall risk for this location is 83, which is pretty high. So I'm going to want to be thinking about hot weather day response plans, storm response and resilience, things like that first. So then we have the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation tool. So this again, covers the heat and cold, drought, wildfire, flooding, sea level rise topics. And this one is a little bit more, well, I'll say a lot more detailed. So if you want to know specifically how many more days are we going to have that are over 90 degrees? What about 100 degrees? What about 105 degrees? This tool really gives you more specific data around each of these different climate hazards. So if you're looking at raw materials or looking for general like geographic trends, this is a great tool for that. And then, the World Wildlife Federation, this again is a more geographic level tool rather than specific location. But, most folks don't know, but there is, in addition to the climate crisis, it's going hand in hand with water risks. And so it's actually estimated that by 2030, global demand for water will outpace supply by 40%. Because climate crisis is changing how and where our water is falling, and it's impacting water table and water quality all around the world. So the WWF Risk Filter Suite actually has some great maps where you can look at not just not just how much water, but water quality and water ecosystem impacts as well. And it's got a couple of different scenarios, a couple of different decades that you can explore to start thinking about water and your business. Okay, and lastly, when we talk about assessing climate risks, we have the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So again, if you're at a certain level of corporate, most of the big businesses are already reporting through TCFD. And of course, this is because investors want to know, what's the risk profile of the business? Should I invest in this company? And they're thinking about the impacts of climate change on the businesses that they want to invest in as well. So this is the genesis of these questions. But it's really, I like it because it's a comprehensive guide of like, if we go down this list and answer all these questions, we'll have a pretty good climate risk profile after that. So here's, for example, the physical risks is pretty much extreme weather, as we discussed, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the transitional risks. So for example, we have enhanced emissions reporting obligations, so like compliance, as we talked about, and or litigation, exposure to litigation, costs to transition to the lower emissions technology, or shifts in consumer preferences. These are just some examples, but this free guide is a great resource for a holistic profile. Okay, so now let's talk about mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is all about reducing the impact of your business. So this could mean switching to renewable energy sources. It could mean reducing business travel. So a lot of the mitigation is focusing on greenhouse gas reduction, because obviously that's super high priority. But it doesn't have to be just greenhouse gases. It could be water, as we discussed. It could be waste. It could be sourcing more sustainable raw materials. And so these are all options for mitigating the impact of your business. One tool I want to highlight here is the Better Building Solutions Center by the Department of Energy. So this is a great archive of all sorts of energy efficiency projects, not just implementation in facilities, but how they financed those projects, how they worked with innovative and started new partnerships to get that going. Really great resource here. Then we have adaptation. So adaptation is all about reducing your vulnerability to the impacts of the climate crisis. You're going to want to think about redundancy and emergency response plans, offline utility capacity. So in the bottom picture on the left, you'll see those are diesel storage tanks. So a lot of big businesses who rely heavily on diesel as a form of fuel will actually have on-site diesel storage so that they can run their generators in the event of a power outage. So that's actually very common, but this picture actually shows, it doesn't, I think I might see a hole in it, but this is actually a flood defense in front of those diesel storage tanks right there. So that's an example of offline utility as well as resilient infrastructure. So flooding defense, battening down the hatches, as they say, whatever that looks like for your business, that's what that means. Then we're getting into also nature-based solutions. So green roofs, restoring local ecosystems to help prevent that flooding in the first place. Nature-based solutions is the high-level term for this, and you'll start seeing that big businesses like Amazon, Microsoft are actually pumping millions of hundreds of millions of dollars in some case into these nature-based solutions. I love it. It's using private equity to restore nature, and I think it's a great win-win for companies to stand out. You get a great story. It's great team building. Like if you go plant trees with your team for a day, that's something that a small business can do. Yeah, maybe has a smaller impact than restoring a whole mangrove, but it definitely contributes to the general nature restoration theme. In a hard case, you may have to relocate facilities. I know that when I worked in my corporate company, we were looking at companies or facilities located in high risk areas for drought. They were actually starting to create plans where they would be trucking water in for those facilities. Or if you're, at close to sea level, you're going to be looking at flooding, storm surge, things like that. It may actually be cheaper to relocate your business in some cases. Other adaptation techniques you could do, education is a huge piece. I think we have the solutions that we need today, and it's really just a matter of education, motivation, and financing. And so that's something your company can do. Maybe you want to look into facility certification. So as I said, there's a lot of examples out there. There's no need for your business to reinvent the wheel. One way you can do that is by going after a certification. So maybe you want your product to be certified or your facility to be certified. LEED is a great resource for green building practices. And that kind of takes some of the guesswork because they have existing frameworks for you to follow. And then, of course, more philanthropic efforts such as supporting community or environmental justice groups in your area is also a great way to adapt. So a tool I want to highlight here is the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, or CAKE. So this is a really fun one. So if you wanted to think about specific risks for your business like drought or wildfire, what could my business do to help adapt, or what's going on in my state, what's going on in my general geographic region that I could start getting involved in. CAKE has a lot of really great case studies, tools to help you with that. And I want to close out with two case studies here. So the first case study is Fat Tire. That's America's first certified carbon neutral beer. And so this is from their sustainability page. They've got a couple of great examples of mitigation and adaptation. So for example, lighter weight packaging, they're certified carbon neutral, they're using 60% renewable energy. They've donated millions of dollars to climate and environmental groups and grants, zero waste facility, B Corp certification, and then up here in the top right, investing in supply chain sustainability. So this was a great example of how they're helping their supply chain adapt to the impacts of climate change while also mitigating effects at the same time. So they're implementing climate-friendly growing practices, so regenerative agriculture. So this is cover cropping, reducing tillage, They're working in networks with smaller brands and farms. And that's really how companies start going above and beyond and really amplifying their impact, is by working with their suppliers. So this was a great example I wanted to highlight. And then secondly, we have a lot of federally funded resilience grants coming down the line. So the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act actually allocated a lot of money for climate resiliency projects. And just a few weeks ago, my home state of Maryland was awarded almost $3 million in grants for a number of climate resilience projects related to flooding or other weather events. And these, again, are restoring nature, restoring shoreline, these kind of nature-based solutions to help with the impacts of the climate crisis. So this was just one example. A lot of states got money, and this money is going to be trickling down. So even if you're looking to contribute, get outside for a day, start working with a local tree planting company in your area, definitely keep an eye out, because more activities are going to be happening, and I'm sure they're going to be looking for more volunteers. All right, so in conclusion, what does all this mean for your business? So, if it's compliance, a lot of these legislations are new last year, this year, and really the reporting deadline isn't until 2025 or even 2026. So it may be 1 to 2 years if you're part of those supply chains before you start getting questions from your customers. That being said, the climate crisis is happening now. You could experience a weather event, or a competitor could come out with, a more eco-friendly product, or beat you in operational costs through efficiency tomorrow. So really, the time to prepare is now. The trends are moving in one direction, and that's moving towards more disclosure. Sustainability is becoming more important rather than less. So this is not just talking about climate risk, but the big frameworks are moving more towards nature and biodiversity impacts, as well as linking climate risks with impacts to human and social rights. So there's a global trend here, and your business still can stand out in this field. So, my whole goal is to help businesses stand out through sustainability. So as I said earlier, managing climate risks not just helps your business be more resilient, but it opens up a lot of opportunity, especially if if you're an early adopter in your industry, you have opportunity for a lot of great PR. You have opportunities to build brand loyalty. You can bring your operational costs down through some of these efficiencies, networking and working with innovative partners. These are all things that make great businesses anyway, and it's no different with sustainability. But there's just so much action in this space. It is so exciting, and there's a lot of great ways to build the world you want to live in through your business. So of course, Sustainability Solutions is here to help. I help companies develop their climate risk profile or their general high-level sustainability roadmap, including decarbonization. I also do speaking events, educational events. I help with product sustainability, and I also help with funding assessment. So as I said, there's a lot of grants and a lot of different funding coming down the line through states, and I love helping connect businesses with those funding opportunities. If you want to email me, you can email me directly, hannah@sustainabilitysolutions.com. You're signed up for the newsletter because you signed up for this webinar already, but keep an eye out for that monthly newsletter, and would love to see you at another monthly free webinar that I offer. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook as well. Here are my references for this webinar in case you wanted to look anything up later. And again, I'll share the tools through the newsletter. And so thank you. That concludes the climate risk webinar for this month.